Think about a promise, a real one, the kind that costs something to make and costs more to keep. The kind you make at 3 in the morning in a room where the stakes are high enough that the words come out of you before you have fully decided to say them, pulled forward by the moment rather than chosen in the ordinary deliberate way of a person who has weighed their options and selected the best one. The kind that becomes, from the moment it leaves your mouth, a fixed point, a thing you orbit rather than a thing you can set down. Now think about this. You are a cardiac patient at 2 in the morning. You are on a step-down unit in a hospital in a mid-sized city, and you have been on this unit for 4 days following an event that, at its worst moment, represent your heart deciding to stop doing the thing that hearts are supposed to do without interruption for the entire duration of a human life. The event has passed. The intervention was successful. You are, by every measure available to the people monitoring you, on the correct side of the ledger. This knowledge does not help at 2 a.m. At 2 a.m., when the floor is as quiet as a hospital floor gets and the cardiac monitor above your bed has been making its sound for so many consecutive hours that the sound has become the texture of the air itself, the knowledge of your clinical stability does nothing about the specific cold fear that lives under the ribs of every cardiac patient in the deep hours of the night. The fear that the machine above you is not a reassurance but a countdown. The fear that the heart, having revealed itself as capable of betrayal, may betray again without warning at any hour. At 2 a.m., what helps is not data. What helps is a person. Specifically, a person who appears at the foot of your bed without fanfare, who stands there in the specific unhurried way of someone who has nowhere else to be and no other priority than this room and this moment and you, who says, quietly, in the manner of someone stating a fact rather than performing a comfort, that he is going to be here. That he is not going anywhere. That when you close your eyes and open them again, he will still be here. That is the promise Thomas Hadley made to every patient on Bay 9 at Kessler Regional Medical Center. He made it in the specific hours when cardiac patients most needed to hear it. He made it 412 times over the 4 years he worked that floor, which is the number that Dr. Caroline Marsh will calculate later from the floor's patient admission records, when she is sitting in the monitoring station at 5 in the morning trying to understand what she has witnessed tonight. 412 times. He kept everyone, including the ones he made after he was dead. Before this story breaks your heart and rebuilds it again, please subscribe to this channel, ring that bell, and drop a comment below telling me which town or city you're listening from tonight. I read every single one. Kessler Regional sits on the western edge of Boise, Idaho, where the city gives way to the foothills and the foothills give way to the specific vast quiet of the high desert, and the sky above the building at night is the kind of sky that people who have spare lives in cities with light pollution drive hours to see, black and salted with stars. The Milky Way, a literal visible band across it, the scale of it doing the thing that large dark skies do to people who encounter them, which is to make the human concerns of the day feel briefly and usefully small. Bay 9 occupies the 3rd floor of the East Wing. 12 beds, divided into 2 rows of 6 facing the central monitoring station, each bed visible through a glass panel that the night staff are required to maintain their awareness through at all times. The monitoring equipment on Bay 9 is among the most current in the hospital, updated 2 years ago as part of a cardiac infrastructure grant, and the alarms it produces are calibrated with the specific sensitivity of equipment designed for patients who are 1 bad hour from requiring something more urgent than monitoring. The patients on Bay 9 have all been through a cardiac event of some kind: STEMI, NSTEMI, unstable angina with intervention, arrhythmia requiring cardioversion. The vocabulary of cardiac medicine is populated with terms that sound, in the abstract, like the names of procedures and conditions, and that feel, to the people they are applied to, like the names of the days their lives changed. The patients on Bay 9 carry this vocabulary the way they carry the monitors on their chests, attached, necessary, and heavier than it looks. Caroline Marsh has worked this floor for 5 years. She chose it for the same reason the best clinicians always choose the floors they choose, because the work here is real in a way that makes everything she was trained to do matter. Bay 9 is not a floor where abstract medicine is practiced. It is a floor where the stakes are present and legible, where the work of the night is directly connected to the outcome of the morning, and where the physician who chose to be here at 3 in the morning, instead of sleeping can, on a given night, be the specific difference between a good outcome and a different one. She is white, 5'7", with dark brown hair she keeps in a braid for the night shifts, and the specific kind of face that people describe as the kind of face you want to see when you are frightened, not because it is soft or reassuring in an empty way, but because it carries the evidence of having been in difficult rooms and come through them, and people can read that evidence even when they cannot name it. She is also the physician who, 18 months into her tenure on Bay 9, began to notice the walker. She had not thought of him as a ghost. This is worth stating clearly, because the subsequent events of this story might suggest that she was a person who had been building toward a supernatural conclusion and arrived at it with relief. She had not been. She was a hospitalist with a background in internal medicine and a clinical disposition that valued the measurable over the speculative, and the walker was, as far as she was concerned, a night staff member whose scheduling she had not personally reviewed, and whose she accepted in the same category as the other variables of Bay 9 at night. The radiator that clicked in cold weather, the monitor in bed 7 that ran 8 seconds behind the others, the family room coffee machine that produced coffee stronger than the one in the break room, and that the night staff quietly preferred. She had noticed him because of the patients. The specific thing she had noticed first was the pattern in the 2 a.m. vitals. Bay 9's overnight vital checks ran at midnight, 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., and the 2 a.m. check was the one that most reliably surfaced the elevated heart rates and blood pressure fluctuations of patients experiencing the specific anxiety of the deep night cardiac hours. She had tracked this pattern for long enough to have a clear baseline. She knew which patients were likely to spike at 2 a.m. She knew the magnitude of the spike. She knew the interventions it typically required. Approximately 8 months after she first noticed the walker, she observed that the patients who had been visited by him in the hour before the 2 a.m. check were presenting with significantly reduced anxiety indicators at the check. Heart rates that she would have expected to find elevated were not elevated. Blood pressure readings that she would have expected to require a call to the patient's room were not requiring a call. She had initially attributed this to a staffing improvement, a night that happened to go more smoothly than average. Then it happened again. Then she ran 3 months of 2 a.m. check data against the nights when she had seen the walker on the floor. And the correlation was the kind of correlation that a clinician with Caroline's background did not dismiss. She had flagged the scheduling records for review. The scheduling records showed the regular overnight rotation, 1 RN, 1 LPN, and the rotating night technician whose primary responsibilities were equipment checks and specimen handling. No orderly. On every night that she had documented the walker's presence, the scheduling records showed a floor with 3 staff members. She had verified this 3 times before she closed the records. She had sat at the monitoring station for a while after closing the records. Then she had gone back to work, because the work was the thing, and the monitoring station was not a place for extended reflection on variables that defied documentation, and Bay 9 had 12 patients who required her attention more than the scheduling records required her confusion. She had filed the walker in the category she maintained for things she had not yet found adequate language for, and she had gone back to the floor, and she had kept going back to the floor for another 10 months before March 14th arrived and provided the language whether she was ready for it or not. Gerald Cook had been a school teacher for 38 years. He had taught 8th grade history at Jefferson Middle School, in the same Boise neighborhood where he had grown up, married, raised 2 daughters, and buried his wife of 43 years, Ruth, who had died of ovarian cancer 3 years before his admission to Bay 9 and whose absence was, by his own account, the central fact of the years since her death. He was 71 years old, slim and slightly stooped in the way of tall people who have spent decades bending to the level of 12-year-olds, with the specific quality of a person who has spent 40 years paying full attention to other people's children and has developed, as a consequence, both an exhaustive patience and a very low tolerance for dishonesty. He had come to Bay 9 via the emergency department, following a myocardial infarction that his daughter Janet, who had driven him to the ER at 11 at night, because he had described the chest pain to her on the phone, and she had the medical intuition of someone who had watched her mother die in a hospital and was not going to be talked out of acting on what she knew, had arrived in time to prevent from becoming a fatality. The lady occlusion had been 92% by the time the interventional team reached it. The stent had been placed and the artery had been opened and the heart had been preserved with the specific margin of success the cardiologist described to Janet afterward as the kind of margin that made you think about luck and not want to think about it too long. Gerald had been on Bay 9 for 4 days. He was a model patient in the way that former teachers are sometimes model patients. He listened to instructions with the attention of someone who had spent his career explaining things to people and understood what it felt like when the person on the receiving end was not fully present. And he had decided early in his admission that the least he could do for the people caring for him was be the kind of patient who paid attention when he was supposed to pay attention and rested when he was supposed to rest. He rested poorly at night. This was not unusual for Bay 9. The nights on Bay 9 were hard for most of the patients, for the reason that the non-cardiac step-down are always hard. Because darkness and quiet, and the removal of the day's distractions, leaves the mind with the material it has been avoiding, and the material cardiac patients have been avoiding is the specific, unignorable knowledge of what the heart is, and what it has recently proven capable of. Gerald processed this material with the particular quality of a man who had already lost the thing he loved most and who understood, therefore, that loss was real, and that pretending otherwise was a form of dishonesty. He was no longer willing to perform. He lay awake in bed 12. He thought about Ruth. He thought about his daughters. And on the second night, at 2:17 a.m., he looked up and found a man standing at the foot of his bed. He described the experience to Caroline the following morning in the matter-of-fact tone of a 71-year-old who had taught 8th graders for 4 decades and who was therefore constitutionally resistant to melodrama. He was just there, Gerald said. Tall fellow, gray scrubs, white at the temples, the kind of face that has some mileage on it. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there, and I thought he was checking on me, which is what you all do. So I waited for him to say whatever he needed to say and go on to the next room. Caroline waited. But he didn't go on to the next room, Gerald's. He stayed. And after a while he said, "Having a hard night?" And I said, "A bit." And he said, "Do you want to talk or do you want company without the talking?" And I said, "I think the second one." And he said, "I can do that." And he stayed. Caroline said, for about an hour. Just stood there. Occasionally he'd adjust the blanket at the foot of the bed, or check the monitor leads, practical things, and once he put his hand on my arm for a moment, and his hands were warm, very warm, warmer than you'd expect in this room, and I went to sleep. Gerald paused. Which I had not done before midnight since I came in. Did he tell you his name? Gerald looked at her for a moment. Tom, he said. He said his name was Tom. He said he worked this floor. He said, he paused, and the expression that crossed his face had a quality that was not quite sentimentality and not quite grief, but was somewhere in the precise territory between them, the territory of people who have had things said to them at vulnerable hours that they did not fully receive until later. He said, "I'll be here when you wake up." He said it like a fact. Caroline wrote this down. She was not certain yet what she was writing it down for. She was certain it needed to be written. She ran the name that night. She had access to the hospital's staff directory through the physician portal, and the staff directory included current and former employees back to the hospital's 1997 digitization date. She typed the name and the unit and the role and waited while the system ran its search. The directory returned one result. Thomas Hadley, orderly, Bay 9, cardiac step down, active employment dates spanning 4 years. A photograph, the standard badge photo, slightly overexposed in the way of all hospital badge photos, the face of a man who was somewhere in his mid-60s at the time of the photograph, white-haired at the temples, the kind of face that had some mileage on it. The specific face of someone who had been places and done things and arrived, eventually, at a form of quiet that was not the quiet of someone who had given up, but the quiet of someone who had come to terms. She looked at the photograph for a long time. The face in the photograph was the face Gerald Cook had described. The white at the temples was the white she had seen, obliquely, from the monitoring station, in the figure that moved through Bay 9 on the nights when the 2 a.m. vitals were inexplicably calm. She scrolled to the bottom of the record. The employment end date was 14 months before her first shift on Bay 9. The reason field contained a code. She had been a hospital employee long enough to know most of the codes. She looked this one up to be certain. It meant deceased. The cause of death, accessible through the HR system's linked records for insurance and next-of-kin notification purposes, was documented in a single clinical line: sudden cardiac event. Time of death, 6:14 a.m. Location: employee break room, 3rd floor, east wing. The break room at the top of the stairs from Bay 9. The break room he would have been walking toward at the end of his overnight shift. She sat in the monitoring station for a while. Through the glass panels of the Bay rooms, the 12 patients of Bay 9 breathed and slept and monitored and endured. The monitors above each bed ran their steady light. The floor was as quiet as it got. She thought about the 412 patients who had been admitted to Bay 9 in the period between Thomas Hadley's death and tonight. The patients who had woken at 2 a.m. with the cardiac patient fear and found a man standing at the foot of their bed who said, "I will be here when you wake up." The patients whose 2 a.m. vitals had been inexplicably stable. The patients who had described, in the next morning's handover notes, a dream about a kind man in gray scrubs who had sat with them in the night. She thought about the promise he had made. She thought about the 14 months of keeping it. She thought about what it meant, whatever it meant, whatever framework she could or could not apply to it, that a man had died in the break room, at the top of the stairs from his floor, at the end of a shift, and had apparently declined to let that stop him from coming back for the next one. She went to check on Gerald Cook. On the night of March 13th, a Wednesday, Bay 9 ran at its standard capacity. Caroline managed the floor with the attentive efficiency of 5 years on this unit. The midnight round, the medication checks, the patient interactions that fell between the scheduled tasks and were not in any chart, but were the real work, the conversations with patients who were awake at 1 in the morning and needed something that was not a clinical intervention. She spoke with Gerald Cook at 1:40 a.m. He was sitting up in bed 12, the way he always sat up in the night hours, with the lamp at its lowest setting and the cardiac monitor doing its thing above him. He had been reading a battered paperback of a history of the American West that his daughter had brought, a subject he had been teaching for 38 years and apparently never tired of. He lowered the book when she came in and gave her the full, attentive look of someone who was used to being the one in the room paying most attention. "How are you tonight, Gerald?" she said. "Better," he said. "The last 2 nights have been better than the first 2. He paused. "Tom has been by." She kept her face even. "Has he? Both nights. Same as the first time. Just stands there mostly. We talk sometimes. He told me about his wife. They were married for 30 years, he said. She passed about 5 years ago." Gerald looked at his hands on the book. "I told him about Ruth. He said he understood. He said the first year was the hardest and that it didn't stop being hard after that, but it changed character. Became something you carried differently." Caroline said, "What else did he tell you?" Gerald looked at her with the expression of a former teacher reading a student's question for its real meaning. He told me he used to work this ward, Gerald said. He said he worked nights here for 4 years. He said he chose nights because the nights were when the patients needed someone most, and he wanted to be the person who was there. A pause. He said he had a condition himself. His heart. He knew what the nights felt like from the inside. He said was why he stayed in this work. Because he knew, she said. Gerald. Does he seem? She stopped. Real? Gerald said. She did not answer. Dr. Marsh, Gerald said, with the gentle, precise tone of a man who has spent his career finding the right words for difficult truths in front of 12-year-olds. I am 71 years old. I have buried my wife and 2 of my closest friends. I know what real looks like in a person, and I know what it looks like when something is wearing real, like a coat that does not quite fit. He looked toward the foot of his bed. Tom is real. Whatever he is, wherever he is between the times I see him, he is as real as anything in this room. He is, in fact, the realest thing that has happened to me since I came through those doors 4 days ago. Caroline looked at the foot of the bed. The room was at its standard temperature. No cold. No presence. Get some sleep, she said. Your echo is at 9. I know, Gerald said. Good night, doctor. She went back to the monitoring station. She pulled up the scheduling records one more time. 3 staff. No orderly. Just the walker on a floor where the walker had been dead for 14 months. She went back to work. The alarm from bed 12 sounded at 3:08 a.m. Caroline heard it from the medication room and was moving before the second cycle of the alarm. Because alarm recognition on Bay 9 is not a deliberate process after 5 years, it is reflexive, the body responding to the specific pitch before the mind has consciously named what it is hearing. She was through the door of the medication room and into the Bay corridor in 4 seconds, and she had the crash cart tagged for bed 12 mentally before she reached the glass panel of Gerald Cook's room. She could see through the glass that the monitor above bed 12 was showing ventricular fibrillation, the erratic, unsustainable pattern of a heart that has lost the coordinated electrical signal that makes it a pump and has become instead a trembling, ineffective thing that circulates nothing and is consuming itself. She pushed through the door. VFib, bed 12, she called into the corridor, the code designation that summoned the night team from wherever they were on the floor. Get me the cart. The RN, Ryan, who had been on Bay 9 for 3 years and who was as good a night nurse as the unit had, was through the door behind her in 20 seconds with the crash cart, and the LPN was at the door in another 15, and Caroline was already at Gerald's side with her hands on his chest, checking, assessing, running the rapid evaluation of a physician who has done this before, and knows that the window in ventricular fibrillation is measured in minutes. Gerald was unresponsive. No pulse, no spontaneous respiration. Starting CPR, she said. She positioned her hands. 2-minute cycles. Ryan on compressions after the first cycle, charged to 200. The room became what it becomes in these moments, not chaos, the opposite of chaos, the highly structured urgency of a team running a protocol that exists specifically because the moment it is needed does not permit improvisation. Each person in the room had a defined role and moved within it with the precision of rehearsal. The crash cart was open. The defibrillator was charged. The airway was managed. The medications were drawn. She shocked him. The monitor returned a flat line. She shocked him again. Epian. Resume compressions. Let's go. They ran the code for 23 minutes. She ran it with the full engagement of everything she knew. Every drug, every timing, every intervention that the literature supported and her 5 years on this unit had validated. She ran it the way she ran every code on Bay 9, which was with the understanding that the person on the table was a person, and that the protocol existed to serve the person and not the other way around. At 3:31 a.m., the monitor showed a flat line that had been flat for 4 minutes, and the rhythm check showed no organized electrical activity, and she had done everything. She stood at the foot of the bed. She said, "Time of death, 3:31 a.m. Ryan recorded it. The LPN stepped back from the IV pole. The room had the specific, very particular quality of a room in which a code has just been called, the hyperkinetic urgency gone, replaced by a stillness that was not peaceful, but was the necessary thing that followed the end of the possible. Caroline looked at Gerald Cook. She looked at the 71-year-old former history teacher who had loved his wife for 43 years and had sat in this bed for 4 nights talking to a dead man about grief. She looked at him with the expression she had developed over years of this work, the expression that was not detachment and was not despair, but was the specific held acknowledgement of someone who has done everything and is now doing the one thing left, which is to be present for the ending. Gerald Cook took a breath. She stood absolutely still for 2 full seconds. The breath was not the automatic gasp of residual brainstem activity, which she had seen before and knew how to read. The breath was a full, deliberate inhalation, the specific quality of a breath taken by a person who has decided to take it. It was followed by a second breath, and the second was stronger than the first, and the monitor above bed 12 produced a sound that made Ryan spin toward it with the expression of someone who has witnessed something their training did not prepare them for. The monitor showed a sinus rhythm. Regular. Strong. The textbook pattern of a heart that has resumed its function with a completeness that had no available clinical explanation in the context of the preceding 23 minutes. "He's got a rhythm," Ryan said in the voice of someone reporting a fact that they are simultaneously processing and not yet believing. "Sinus rhythm. Rate of 62. It's clean. It's a completely clean rhythm." Caroline's hands found the bed rail. She gripped it, not for support, for contact, for the specific grounding of a solid surface in a moment when the solid surfaces of clinical reality had become temporarily unreliable. Gerald Cook's eyes opened. They opened with the slow, gathering focus of a person returning from a significant distance, not the rolling disorientation of a standard post-arrest return. They moved. Ceiling, monitor, Ryan. The foot of the bed. They found the foot of the bed and stopped. His expression changed. The word for what appeared on Gerald Cook's face at 3:32 a.m. on March 14th was not surprise, though surprise was present in it. It was recognition. The specific, absolute recognition of a person who has been waiting, without knowing they were waiting, for a specific other person to arrive, and who has arrived at the arrival, from a place so far from ordinary expectation that the recognition lands like a physical force. He said, "Tom." His voice was the voice of a man who has just come back from very far away and is addressing the first familiar thing he has encountered on his return. "Quiet." "Certain." "Tom Hadley," he said. "You're still here." Caroline turned toward the foot of the bed. The foot of the bed was empty. She saw nothing. No figure, no gray scrubs, no white-templed face with mileage in it. The cardiac bay was precisely as it had been in every other moment she had stood in it. The overhead light, the monitor glow, the institutional blankness of a room designed for function over aesthetics. But the temperature had dropped. She felt it in the specific way she had felt it on the nights when the walker was on the floor. The sudden, total withdrawal of ambient warmth, as though something had drawn the heat of the room into itself. Her breath was visible. She could see Ryan's breath too, and the LPN's, and she watched them register it. The small involuntary reactions of people whose bodies have received information their minds are still processing. Gerald Cook was looking at the foot of the bed. He was looking at it with the steady, unblinking attention of someone in conversation with a specific presence, his eyes tracking slightly, as though following movement, his expression cycling through things that she could not fully name. Relief and grief, and the specific compound of emotions that belong to a reunion between people who share the experience of loss. "I know," Gerald said. Not to Caroline, not to Ryan, not to anyone in the room that any of them could see. "I know about the nights," all of them. A pause. 412. "I know." Ryan looked at Caroline. She held up one hand, the same flat, decisive gesture that means, "Wait," in every context it has ever been used in. "You don't have to stay," Gerald said. "I'm all right. Whatever you did just now, you don't have to carry it anymore." I'm going to be all right. His voice had the specific quality of a man making a pronouncement rather than asking a question. The voice of someone who has spent his adult life in rooms full of young people who needed certainty, who had learned to produce it even on the days when he was not certain, and who was producing it now from a different kind of certainty than the performed variety. Tom, a pause. I'll tell them. The one's still here. I'll make sure they know someone was here with them. Everyone. The cold in the room deepened for a single moment. The specific, dense cold of the previous ghost scripts. The cold that is not temperature but weight. The cold of something that has been held for a very long time, pressing into the room one final time before it releases. Gerald reached out his right hand toward the foot of the bed. He held it there. He said, "Go be with Ruth, Tom. You've done your shift. Go on." The monitors above every bed on Bay 9 spiked simultaneously. A single, brief surge across all 12 screens. The kind of electrical disturbance that maintenance engineers attribute to a power fluctuation, and that no power fluctuation was ever documented to have caused. The overhead light in Bed 12's bay flickered. The cold peaked and broke, not gradually, the way temperature returns to a room when a draft has been closed off, but all at once, the warmth of the room returning in a single, complete moment that felt physical, felt like something arriving rather than something being restored. Gerald Cook lowered his hand. He lay back against the pillow. His eyes moved to Caroline. "He's gone," Gerald said. His voice was even. "He was here and now he's gone. He's been here every night and now he's done." Caroline looked at the foot of the bed for a long moment. The floor there was unmarked, the smooth, undisturbed linoleum of a surface that no weight had rested on, though the warmth now returning to the room carried in it something she could not name precisely, some quality of having been occupied that lingered the way the warmth of a vacated chair lingers, the specific evidence of a presence that has been and is now finished. She said, "Gerald, can I check your vitals?" He said, "Of course." He looked at the ceiling for a moment. He said he made a promise. He said he made it to 412 people, and he kept every one, and mine was the last. She placed 2 fingers on his radial pulse. 64 beats per minute, strong, regular. She looked at the monitor. Sinus rhythm, textbook quality, the heartbeat of a man who should, by all available clinical evidence, not currently have a heartbeat. "What else did he say?" she asked. Gerald turned his head to look at her. He said, "Thank you for taking care of the ones I left." She sat in the monitoring station for a long time after Gerald Cook fell asleep. He fell asleep the way he had fallen asleep on the previous 3 nights when Tom Hadley had visited, with the complete, uncomplicated ease of a person who has been relieved of something they were carrying without knowing how much it weighed until it was gone. The cardiac monitor above Bed 12 ran its steady, untroubled rhythm. His respiratory rate was 12. His oxygen saturation was 96%. His blood pressure, when she had checked it 40 minutes after the event, was 122/78. The cardiologist on call, whom she had paged per protocol following the code, had arrived at 4:15 a.m. and reviewed the chart and the event documentation and the current vitals with the expression of a man who was very good at his specialty and who had developed, over 23 years of practicing it, a specific relationship with outcomes that defied his expectations. The expression was not wonder, exactly, and it was not clinical detachment. It was the expression of someone who has been in this profession long enough to have collected a small, but incontrovertible set of experiences that his training had never prepared him for, and who has accepted the existence of this set, without being able to add to it easily. "The rhythm is clean," Dr. Ellison said. "Better than clean. His QRS morphology is, this is the best his ECG has looked since admission." He scrolled through the overnight data. "What happened in those 8 minutes between the flat line and the resumption of rhythm?" Caroline said, "I ran the protocol. Everything went in on schedule." Ellison looked at her. "That's not what I mean," he said. "The epi and the CPR and the defibrillation, those explain the resumption. They don't explain the quality of the resumption. Something happened to this patient's cardiac tissue between 3:08 and 3:32 that goes beyond what the standard intervention produces. He scrolled further. It looks like a heart that has been rested. Like a heart that has taken a break and come back stronger for it. He set down the tablet. I have no framework for that. No, Caroline said. Do you? She looked at the tablet in his hands. At the ECG trace that showed Gerald Cook's heart beating with a regularity and strength that exceeded the clinical expectation. Not a clinical one, she said. Ellison looked at her for a moment. Then he said, there was a man here before you. An orderly. Tom Hadley. She was very still. He died before you joined the team, Ellison said. Sudden cardiac event. I was on call that night. I ran his code. He paused. He was extraordinary. Spent 4 years on this floor doing more for the patients than anyone whose job title was orderly had any reason to do. The patients. You know how patients talk. Word gets around. Families talk to each other in the waiting area. The patients used to request Bay 9 specifically. Because of Tom. Because of what he told them, Caroline said. Ellison looked at her. Because of what he told them, he confirmed. They sat in the monitoring station for a while. The floor breathed around them. 12 patients in 12 beds, each one on the other side of something that had tried to stop them, each one kept by the work of a floor that had been keeping people for decades. He used to say, Ellison said, in the tone of someone deciding to say a thing rather than keep it, that the hardest thing about Bay 9 was that the patients were frightened specifically at the hour when you had the least staff to manage that fear. He said the clinical interventions were the easier part. He said the harder part was the 2 a.m. fear. The cardiac patient at 2 a.m. Ellison looked toward the Bay corridor. He said he was going to solve that problem. He said that was the thing he was on this floor to solve. He solved it, Caroline said. Yes, Ellison said, he did. The handover happened at 7. Caroline gave it the way she always gave it. Complete, in the systematic sequence that the day team needed. Each patient by patient. Each clinical picture rendered in the specific flat language of a handover that prioritizes accuracy and comprehensiveness and leaves no room for anything the day team would have to interpret. She gave it all. The overnight events, the interventions, the outcomes, the current state of each of the 12 patients on Bay 9. She gave Gerald Cook's handover last. She gave it factually. The VFib at 3 or 8, the code, the interventions, the timeline. The resumption of rhythm at 3:32. The current vitals, which were better than the handover team's expectations for a post-arrest patient by a margin she documented without editorial. The cardiologist's note from 4:15. The plan for the morning echo and the review of the intervention threshold for ICU transfer. She did not give them the rest of it. The cold. The 8 minutes. Gerald's hand extended toward the foot of the bed, and the name he had said, and the thing he had promised to carry forward. Some things were in the chart. Some things were not in the chart, and the chart was not the place for them, and the people who needed to know them would know them without the chart. After handover, she went to see Gerald. He was awake. The morning light was coming through the east window of bed 12 in the specific way of a March morning in Boise, when the foothills have had a night of cold and are giving it back in the form of a pale, clean light that makes the world look very clearly itself. He was sitting up and his hands were folded on the blanket, and he was looking at the window with the expression of someone doing the specific work of a morning that has followed a significant night, taking stock, arranging, understanding what the night has left behind. She sat in the chair beside him. How do you feel? She said. He said. He considered the word and decided it was accurate. Not better in the way you mean when you ask. Different. Like something has been resolved that I did not know was unresolved. He looked at his hands. Ruth and I, when she was dying, there were things I did not get to say. Things I held back because I thought there would be more time, and then there was not more time, and I have carried those things for 3 years. He paused. Last night, something happened in this room that I cannot fully describe. But when it was over, the things I was carrying, I was not carrying them the same way. They had not gone, but they had changed what they were. Caroline looked at him. She thought about Tom Hadley in the break room at the top of the stairs. The specific, devastating economy of a man who had gone the way his patients went. Suddenly, without sufficient warning, at the end of a shift on the floor he had given 4 years of himself to. Who had been reaching the break room when the thing that took him arrived, and who had turned around apparently and gone back. Tom Hadley, she said. He worked this floor before I came. He died 14 months before my first shift. I found his file last week. Gerald was quiet for a moment. I know, he said. Did he tell you? Not in words. But you know how you sometimes know things without being told, particularly about the dead. You can tell when you're with someone who has died, even if they are standing in front of you and speaking and holding your arm. There is a quality to it. Ruth had it too, in the last weeks when she was very close to the end, a quality of being somewhere else while still being here. He looked at the window. He was kind. Whatever he was kind. And he was here because he chose to be, which is the same reason he was here when he was alive. She sat with him for a while. He said thank you, she said, for taking care of the ones he left. Gerald looked at her. He meant all of you, he said, the whole floor. Every person who chose to work nights here. He met her eyes, including you. But Gerald Cook was discharged 8 days after the night of March 14th. He walked out under his own power, which was the thing. He walked through the corridor of Bay 9 with his daughter Janet beside him and his daughter Susan on his other side, and the nurses who were not in the middle of something they could not leave came to the corridor to see him off, because Gerald Cook was the kind of patient who warranted the specific, informal ceremony of a good discharge, not because his case was unusual, though it was, but because he was himself the kind of person who warranted it. He stopped at the nursing station on his way to the elevator. He said, to Caroline and to Ryan and to the 3 other night staff who happened to be there in the crossover between the shifts, I am going to tell people about this floor. I am going to tell everyone I know that this is a place where someone is with you. I know that sounds general, and you might think I'm talking about the medical care, which is excellent. But I am not talking about the medical care. I am talking about the someone. He looked down the corridor toward bed 12. He chose this floor, he said. Whatever brought him here, whatever kept him here, he chose it, the same way you all chose it. That is not nothing. In fact, it is the thing that matters most. He straightened and turned toward the elevator. When I was a teacher, I used to tell my students that the most important thing in any room is whether the people in it chose to be there. A room full of people who chose to be there is a completely different room from a room full of people who ended up there by accident. He pressed the elevator button. Bay 9 is the first kind of room. You should know that about the place you work. The elevator opened. He and his daughter stepped inside. He turned back once and looked at Caroline with the specific expression she had seen on his face when he talked about Tom Hadley, the expression that was simultaneously grief and gratitude, and the specific compound emotion of someone who has been given something they cannot fully account for, and who has decided, in the absence of full accounting, to simply accept it and carry it forward. The elevator doors closed. Caroline stood in the Bay 9 corridor for a moment. She looked down its length, the 12 glass panels, the monitors visible through them, the amber floor lighting running the length of it, the specific quality of a floor that had just sent someone home and was ready to receive the next person who needed it. She thought about Tom Hadley walking this corridor every night for 4 years when he was alive, every night for 14 months after, 412 patients, 412 promises. 412 times he had stood at the foot of a bed in the darkest hours of a night that felt, from inside it, like it might not end, and said, I will be here when you wake up. He had kept everyone. And on the 412th night, the last patient had held out his hand and said, Go on. You've done your shift. Go on. And he had gone. The nights on Bay 9 did not become different in any measurable way after March 14th. The floor ran its standard rotation. The monitors above the 12 beds ran their standard rhythm. The 2 a.m. vitals were what they were, sometimes elevated, sometimes calm. always the specific variable of a floor, whose patients were fighting the specific fear of the cardiac night. The walker was not seen again. Caroline did not look for him. She had looked for him for 18 months in the half-attentive, peripheral way of someone who has not yet decided whether to look directly. And now she did not look, because looking was no longer the point. The point was the thing Gerald had said at the nursing station on his way to the elevator. The room full of people who chose to be there. She thought about Tom Hadley choosing, every night, to go back to the floor that had the people he had promised to stay for. She thought about choosing it herself, every night, for 5 years. She thought about the corridor at 2 a.m., the amber lights, the glass panels, the 12 hearts beating in their monitored rooms, each one belonging to a person who had been through the thing, and was still here, and was afraid of the night for the reason that people who have been through the thing are afraid of the night, and the specific act of choosing to walk that corridor, and be the person standing at the foot of the bed who said, "I am here. I am not going anywhere. You can close your eyes, and when you open them I will still be here." She thought, that is what he was. She thought, that is what we are. She went back to her floor. She went back to the work. She went back to the 12 rooms and the 12 monitors and the 12 patients who were fighting the specific fight of Bay 9, and she walked the corridor the way Tom Hadley had walked it, not fast, not slow, with the unhurried pace of someone who has nowhere else to be and no other priority than this floor, and these people and this hour. She walked it from end to end, and then she walked it again. If you love this type of intense nurse-taking action tales, hit that like button. Share the video with your fellow thrill seekers, subscribe to our channel, and ring the bell so you never miss a new story.